Welcome back to DC Thursday, everyone. We are here again with another episode to guide you through the rapidly expanding and fascinating modern data ecosystem. I'm Pete Soderling. I'm the founder of Data Council and the Data Community Fund. And today I'm here with Soumyadeb Mitra from Rudderstack, and we're going to discuss the marketing automation world and how accurate customer data requires specific infrastructure. We'll hear about Soumyadeb's thoughts on critical CDP design decisions and learn about some of the important architectural choices that they made at Rudderstack while building and bringing the Rudderstack open source product to market. So Soumyadeb is the co-founder and CEO of Rudderstack. He was previously the co-founder of Mariana IQ, which exited 8x8. Prior to that, he was the chief architect at Data Domain, which was acquired by EMC. And before that, he has a degree in computer science from IIT Delhi and a PhD in CS from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So Soumyadeb, I want to welcome you to DC Thursday.
Thanks, Pete. I'm really humbled to be here and excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Rudderstack has been such an interesting company to follow over the years. And so I'm excited to hear about the origin story and your perspectives on the business and how you ended up bringing this particular product to market.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I love talking about Rudderstack. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
So before we get into the Rudderstack parts of the story, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you end up getting into data?
Yeah, I mean, data was an interesting path, right? I mean, right after my undergrad, I started a company with a couple of my classmates. And at that point, like we are kind of building the next generation like Palm pilots. And this was based out of India, so there was no like iPhone and so on. So I really didn't start my career in data. It was more about embedded systems and design and all that stuff, right? But that company didn't do so well. And then I came for my PhD at Urbana-Champaign. And like when you go for grad school, like you kind of like pick an advisor you like and like a topic you like. And so I ended up in this group called like CSAIR, right? So basically the team did a lot of high performance computing and like simulations and rocket simulations and so on. So like that felt cool. I mean, like I had access to the top, I think it was the third fastest computer in the world and the fifth fastest. Like there was a big center. So, and what my group specifically did was like a lot of data handling for these simulations, right? So they're like enormous amount of data was generated at every stage of these rocket simulations. So like, yeah, that's where my research group like did a lot of work. And that was pretty much my introduction to data. And like, yeah, I mean, this was big data before big data was cool in any sense. I learned a lot and so on. So
Got it.
Like, stayed in this space forever.
And so then what did you do after your PhD?
Yeah, so after my PhD, like I went to this company called Data Domain. So Data Domain, like most of you have not have heard about the company itself. Like the company did very well, but I think like the CEO is probably more famous now, Frank Slootman.
Mm-hmm.
So he is now a big shot. He's a CEO of Snowflake. He wrote a book today, and so on. But like Data Domain was his first company as a CEO. And in fact, like he convinced me to join Data Domain over like Google and Microsoft Research and and some academic. And so the company was very interesting. I mean, like it kind of revolutionized this space called like backups, right? Previously, people used to do backups on tapes, and like tapes are painful to manage and so on. And the founders had this insight that there's a lot of overlap between consecutive backups. They're pretty much the same when you're like backing up daily. And then they kind of build a new file system from scratch to take advantage of that. And they revolutionized this whole backup industry. Company did very well. They went IPO within a couple of years. It was eventually acquired by EMC and so on. So yeah, that was a great experience. But then after the company was acquired, like a lot of the team left, Frank left, and so on. And I also left to I always wanted to like do a startup and so on. So like left to do something on my own.
Got it. And what was your role at Data Domain? What kind of stuff were you working on? I'm curious.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. Like, so data domain had like a core team which worked on backups and like short-term backups, pretty much, right? I mean, you store the data for like a month and 3 months and like at most 3 months, right? And then there was this market for long-term archival of data, right? And that's also related to my PhD, where we looked at how do you store records for a very, very long time, because there are requirements in financial industry that you need to keep stuff for like 7 years and then like 12 years. And like, how do you design your system to like to survive that? Like, there are like all the way from hardware challenges, like your disk will probably not last. Like, I mean, think about like hard drives which were like 12 years ago and so on. How do you design your hardware system to survive that long? To like, how do you do like file system things? How do you do deduplication over that long window? So there are a lot of challenges. So like I kind of led that team which built out this long-term archival product at Data Domain.
Got it. So then tell me what happened next. You said you decided to start your own company.
Yeah. So after Data Domain, like everyone was kind of like, we had a good exit. Like the company was acquired by EMC, and like most of the team was gone. And so I thought, okay, like I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I had tried once before after my undergrad, that didn't go anywhere. So I left Data Domain with to work on a. Now thinking back, it was a very stupid idea. I mean, like I was trying to do something in like identity and things like that. So it's like, I mean, again, I had no idea how to be like how to do market research and things like that. But I just left the company, Data Domain, and thought I'll work on this. And in 3 months, I figured out that this is not going anywhere. So I thought, okay, like I need to survive. So let's do some consulting gigs. Right? Thankfully, being a software developer in the Bay Area, it's pretty easy for you to like find part-time consulting stuff. We work with like I had experience on like big data, machine learning, and did a lot of work around that. And like 2012, 13 is when this was all like catching up, right? So did a couple of consulting gigs on the side, traveled a lot, right? I mean, like my daughter was born right then, so like I wanted to spend some time with her as well. So that lined up well too. Traveled a lot in Europe, in like went back to Asia for some time, and so on. So almost like year and a half, I kind of say I was having fun, right? Doing things on the side which you can like switch off anytime you want, and also like exploring startup ideas. So that's what pretty much was like first 2 years after leaving Data Domain, first year and a half. And then they got bored with that at some point, and then like started a company called Mariana IQ with two other co-founders. So yeah, that was my immediate journey after Data Domain.
Got it. And was that your first experience with customer data?
Yes. So Mariana IQ was like literally my first introduction to marketing as a tech, right? I mean, like before my data was like my PhD Data Domain was a lot of data, but like I mean I had no idea like in fact what does marketing do? Like I mean I thought like marketing was like this obscure team sitting in a company writing like PDFs and so on. Like they don't do much. But then at Mariana IQ, both my co-founders were like ex-marketing people. My CEO co-founder, he ran marketing for Juniper. So like, and the vision of the company was to like almost build the next generation marketing automation system. So a lot of marketing work was very manual, where like marketer has to come in and create campaigns and create assets and figure out like what audiences to assign to what campaigns and run this A/B test and so on. So it's like very, very manual work. And we thought like, can we leverage data and machine learning to like automate a lot of that? Like, can we literally like, now this is a buzzword, right? I mean, like personalization at scale, like one-to-one marketing, whatever. Like we are trying to do that, like using ML at that point. So, and so learned a lot. The company didn't do so well because of a lot of reasons. Part of what was the biggest reason was like most marketing teams do not have a lot of good data. That's kind of what we learned the hard way, including like some of the largest companies we sold to, like Microsoft and Junipers and Cisco's. Like very few marketing teams have good data. So that's why I think like if you do not have good data, you cannot do machine learning. So like it's kind of what we learned. But for me, it was like a fascinating journey, like learning about marketing and like what are the use cases.
Yeah, I've seen this in my entrepreneurial career over time. Is that it's funny how engineers can sometimes get switched on to marketing when they understand how much of it can actually be quantitative. Or obviously, there's qualitative marketing as well, and the positioning and the narrative, writing the copy, and all the things, the campaigns. But but the quantitative side of marketing is actually quite fascinating. And when an engineer understands sort of how a funnel works and how funnel optimizations work,
Yeah.
and they understand how much of marketing is really just based on math and quantitative analysis, it can be sort of a new light that engineers sometimes, especially entrepreneurs, come to see and appreciate marketing in a new way.
Exactly. I would say like anyone who wants to do like data science at scale and so on, they should probably pick up marketing problems. And I wish I mean, if you look at academia in general, like in data science, like people are working on like image recognition. There are like standard data sets where like there's so much brain power being spent on that. Like I wish there were like marketing data sets people could look at and so on. I mean, like it's happening in the ad ecosystem in Facebooks and Googles, but like like it's very much outside of academia and so on. But like there is so much marketing beyond just ads and so yeah. I mean, like totally agree with you. Like there's a lot of innovation in this space.
And so how did your work at Mariana IQ prepare you to start Rudderstack? Usually I find some connection, between ideas explored or gaps or sort of insights that became apparent to a founder, along the journeys prior to them starting the company. I'm curious as to what that looked like for you leading up to the Rudderstack origin.
Yeah, I think the biggest learning was that like marketing teams do not have data, right? So like if you have to enable, like do any ML, do anything, like first like collect good data, right? And like set up those data pipelines and then make sure that like you have access to that, and then you can do like all the other cool stuff. So we ended up selling the company to a company called 8x8 and well, like 8x8, if you don't know, is like a public VoIP company in the telecom space. And like me and the team was told like, okay, now we have all this data, go and figure out what you could do with this data. So, and then like it is kind of natural for us to pick up problems on customer data space, right? So, but then we knew that like to solve the same set of problems, like can we do better lead scoring? Can we do better marketing? Can we do like better churn prediction and all these interesting use cases of like customer data? But then we realized, I mean, like we have to first solve the data problem. Like from my Mariana experience, like get the data first, then we'll do ML. And which itself was another learning. Like getting data itself is not a trivial exercise. Right? The complexity of like the data stack and the sources and the volume and so on makes it really complicated. So and then so pretty much like what we learned the hard way at Mariana was like people don't have data. At 8x8, we kind of learned the hard way that getting the data is a hard problem. Let's solve that first, and then we'll eventually do all the cool ML stuff.
Got it. So you saw a need for a new piece of data infrastructure that didn't exist at the time, or did it exist at the time? I mean, I don't recall exactly when Segment was on the scene, but they were probably around from 2014 or something, probably, right? So did you see that Segment did you acknowledge that they were in this category? Were they in this category at the time, or did you feel like there was a big space, empty space that nobody was really attacking?
Yeah, I mean, like I knew of Segment, like even at Mariana, right? We saw their journey. Right? I mean, we're kind of like at the same point started, and then like they kind of found the right fit. Like they focused on the data infrastructure problem, and then the company just blew up, right? And I mean, I like complete credit to them to discover this like space, right? That you can like data integration in the customer data is a problem, and like they discover the space, they build the first solution, and then so on. I have a great respect for the company and the founders and so on. I think what I found interesting, and the reason I like we are excited about Rudderstack is like I thought like Segment was on a great path, like they were solving the data integration problem, and that there's so much they could do on top. But then at some point, like 2018-19, they switched to like focusing a lot more on the marketing use cases. So like and like they built the personas product, like maybe it was like more bigger deals and so on. So I think like that pivot, and they changed the pricing structure and everything. So suddenly the company focused on like a slightly, I thought, narrower use case, where like the use cases of customer data were well beyond, and there's enough opportunity just to like solve data integration in a complete way. So I thought like they kind of like solved it halfway and then went a different direction for whatever reason and so on. So that was, I guess, like one of the things. One other thing that I guess like we are trying to when I thought was we need to do differently is like if you are selling to marketeers, then they want like a vertically integrated SaaS solution. Like, give me one tool where I can like create audiences and do all the cool stuff I want. But I don't want to manage infrastructure. I don't want to worry about data warehouses, everything. Right. So that's the path like Segment eventually went down. And on the other hand, like I was coming from more of a data science, data engineering background, right? Like marketing was one use case, but there are like so many other use cases around like collecting that data, analyzing, building ML models, and so on. So it a slightly different architecture where you had like complete access to the data and like so that you could do all this stuff, right? And that's where I think was the key reason I thought we started Rudderstack. Right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of those additional use cases, because I think that when people hear CDP or customer data, they often think of the marketing use cases. What are some of these additional use cases that you see as being interesting?
Yeah. So I think like our customers, like almost, and we have learned a lot from our customers in the last couple of years running Rudderstack, right? So they like, if you think from a customer, they almost like take a journey, right? When you are a very small startup, like 5 people, 10 people, then the use case of customer data is like, I built an app, I want to collect all the data and send it to either Google Analytics so that I can do some analysis and then send it to Amplitude or Mixpanel and so on to do some product analytics. And then maybe I'll send it to some marketing tool, like to Braze and so on to do like some marketing, like automated marketing. And so on. Like that's where everybody starts, right? I want to use some SaaS tools and I don't want to do 3 integrations. Like, so that's where you use Rudderstack and Segment. Let's start. We call it like the stack 0. Then once you are slightly more mature, like there are like 20 people and you hired like a data engineer or a data scientist to now look at this data. You want to collect this data and dump into some kind of a data warehouse. And 10 years back, there were no data warehouses. Now, like it's so easy to like collect this data and dump it into Snowflake. And why do you do that? Like there are use cases that cannot be met by like these SaaS tools, like one size fit all SaaS tools, right? I mean, there are some advanced reports you want to build. Like there are some custom things for your business that you want to do, like custom dashboards, right? So that's the second use case of like starting collecting this data into a data warehouse and building those things, right? Now, as your organization matures a bit more, and like so, Rudderstack is a good example, and we have a bunch of customers in the third stage where you are not just collecting the data into a warehouse, but you are now like making that data actionable, right? So good example is like we, for example, collect the data, there's all this activity data and use it to score leads. Like, I mean, our sales team wants to know which of the leads signing up are more active and not, so that they want to prioritize. So you want to build this architecture where you want to collect the data into the warehouse and then you want to like activate it back. Now you see this category called reverse ETL, which is like basically doing this, right? Like taking the data out of a warehouse and pushing it out. But like what happens in between is still like very rule based, right? Simple rules around how many times somebody has logged in the last 7 days. Like that is used for a proxy for scoring and so on, right? So that's the third layer where you're like activating the data, but then it's still very rule based. When you become more mature, that's when you build like more ML models, right? I mean, now you have a data scientist who can like not just do rule-based things in something like DVD, but like they can train like a ML model to do, again, same use cases around scoring, recommendation, segmentation. Like you see a lot of similar use cases around like, and mostly customer churn, segmentation, and so on, right? So that's the 5th stage in that journey. But still the use cases are batch, like in the sense like you want to, if it is a score, churn score, you push it back into some tool, then you send them some promotion and so on. But it's like very batch use cases. Finally, you see like real-time use cases of customer data. Like when you are like really advanced, you're now scale of like a couple of 100 people, like you have like a couple of million users. That's you want to do like real-time personalization and of the app itself and so on. So that's kind of like the journey that every company takes. And like I think like if you look at the existing CDPs, like marketing is a very small fraction of this, right? I mean, like this is the journey. I mean, if you think of like companies like Amazon and like Apple, it is not the marketing team which put together this customer data stack, right? It is the engineering, the data teams, and so on. So, yeah, that makes sense.
So you felt there was an opportunity with Rudderstack to build this infrastructure that was targeted at data engineers and data teams, and not simply just the marketing team or any business sort of vertical user group or use case for that matter. So what's the origin story of Rudderstack? Like, how did you get the company together? How did you find your co-founders, and what were some of the early challenges in the early days?
Yeah, and like so that itself was an interesting journey, right? I mean, we kind of like I knew about, have been working in this space. I knew that there is a problem to be solved here. Partnered with this guy called Shwet Jain, and I don't know if you know him, but like he's a partner at S28 Capital. I've known him for 20 years, and like, stayed in touch with him. And so the company itself was incubated at S28. So like, although I'm like, I don't have a co-founder in a traditional sense of co-founder, but like this was incubated at S28. Like Shwet was very closely involved, definitely in the first year, but even now he's like super involved in the company. So he was technically like a part-time co-founder, if there is a word like that. So yeah, that's kind of the original journey. S28 invested in the seed round of the company, and then yeah, I mean, like I think we got very lucky with finding product market fit like early enough, right? I mean, like I have been on the other side with my previous two startups where like we struggled with product market fit and then we had to like and so on. I mean, so I've seen what the not so great looks like, and now I'm seeing what it looks like. So I think, I mean, I'm truly like I think like we got lucky is probably the right way to say that, but now it's for us to go and execute. So anyway, so that was like, and then we have been like growing since then.
And what was the product, or what was the incarnation of the product that you found product market fit for? Was it, were you open source from the earliest days, or what did the early traction look like?
Yeah, I think like so this was always the vision, right? Build the stack to enable all these use cases I talked about, like some simple stack to the complex stack, right, and so on. But like when we went go to market, it felt like building an open source alternative to something like Segment in this case. Like that was a good way to like put it on Hacker News. So like open source was like a very interesting strategy for us. I mean, I thought like unlike other open source companies where you have an open source project which became very popular and then there was a company, like here we raised money before a single line of code was raised, right? So we are pretty clear that we are building a business here. And open source felt like, I mean, like a lot of traditional sectors were kind of being like impacted by open source. We thought, okay, like CDP makes sense to try an open source strategy, particularly because we are going after the developer persona, right? So we open source we call ourselves an open source CDP or an open source alternative to the CDPs, and went on Hacker News. Like this blew up in Hacker News, so I think that helped us a lot of in our initial growth. I mean, so many companies have again come out of Hacker News. I mean, I cannot find them enough.
So you were committed to being the open source alternative for a CDP from the very earliest days.
Yeah, I mean, like 100%. But last 2 years has been a very interesting learning for us, right? I mean, and in terms of like seeing the growth on open source, but also seeing the growth on cloud, right? So and what that means for us. So yeah, I mean, like yeah, I mean, we're still figuring out like what is the longer term plan around open source and then so on. But I think we are on the core product, we are open source very much committed to that.
And do you have any advice for other founders out there who may be wrestling with the open source versus commercial offering at the onset of their company? Because I talk to lots of founders who, you know, some sort of take this middle of the road approach where they think they're building a commercial product or a cloud product, but they're kind of dabbling in open source, and they're engineers, and so they think open source is cool, and they think they should be open sourcing like pieces of their thing, and they don't really like, you know, come with both feet on one side or the other. What do you think about that? Like, what's your take on coaching founders as to when is the right time to adopt an open source strategy or not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm qualified enough to comment on that, because like these are some of the challenges we are also like trying to figure out and as we scale the company. And I think like I hear that the challenges remain even at like companies like Mongo and Confluent, like they're like much bigger of where we are, right? So this is a challenge that there's a conflict that is always there in the company. But one thing I guess like a couple of things people have known is like firstly, like there are three business models around open source. One is like service based, right? Where you have the core product is open source and you're just selling services on top. Like that's what Red Hat did. And I think like that business model is dead, right? Everyone agrees you'll be able to raise money on that and build a company. Then the second business model was around open core, right? Where you have a core offering and then you have like value added products on top of the core offering. And even that I think like is like, and generally the assumption there is like, then it's like an on-prem offering. Like you download the software, you run it yourself, and so on, and then like you buy some additional services on top to like on which you make money. But this whole business of like your customers downloading the software and setting it up is painful for the customer and also painful for you to support and manage and so on. So like even open code is, I think generally people believe it is kind of dead. And you have, if you look at the companies like Confluence and who have both the models, right? They have like an on-prem offering on which you can pay and get more value-added services, and there is a cloud offering. So cloud is where all the growth is, right? I mean, the open code is almost like a distraction now. So that is also like it's probably dead, right? So then comes the cloud, right? I mean, you have an open source product for people to play with, feel happy about, and set it up. If some customers will do it, but then like you also have a cloud offering, right? And people have the choice of going open source or going cloud. So that's the path we took, right? Almost like at the same time we open sourced the product, we also within a month we had a cloud offering. And we had a generous free tier where you can try the cloud product as well if you want to, or you can use the open source, right? So, and we saw the growth on the free tier on the cloud and the open source, and cloud was clearly a winner. So it was like an interesting learning for us. And as again, like as a buyer, I think it makes sense, right? If I'm a data engineer, I like something being open source, I can play with it, look at the code. There's a lot of good feeling about it. But when I'm running this, like at night, I don't want to get a page call like this, something is down. I mean, I'd rather give it to like a cloud, unless there are strong compliance reasons and all that stuff. But like that becomes like less and less of a concern. Like people are buying onto the cloud. So anyway, long way to answer your question. I don't think I exactly answered it as well because we ourselves are figuring out. But,
Yeah, I think you're right. To observe that the cloud hosted version of a lot of these open source projects is becoming the de facto way to go. The interesting thing that creates is then there's a sort of an obvious break between the upgrade path between people who have your open source bits and are playing around with it, and then who actually become users of your cloud product, which is a completely different sign up process and integration and whatever. So I think what we're seeing in the open source world is that, because of this transition to cloud is real, but now maybe there's not as obvious sometimes of a benefit from having the open source bits out in the wild, because they don't necessarily turn into an automatic upgrade path to your cloud service. Like your cloud service could just have a free tier, and that could be kind of essentially the same from a go-to-market standpoint, like reducing friction and sort of getting customers. And do engineers like really need to like security audit like your code like for most of their use cases? Like not really. So I guess like this is kind of where I'm seeing a bit of a break in some of the open source religion, is because there's not always an automatic easy upgrade path. And you cannot automatically capture all the value you have in those open source bits and directly translate it to your cloud service. But I don't know. I don't know how you see that, or if these are some of the things that you're working through as well.
So, yeah, 100%. I'm with you on that. I think like when I look at like the longer term revenue potential of the company, I don't think open source like directly has very little contribution. I mean, like all our revenue comes from like the cloud upgrade, right? Like we are not like selling anything on the open source, right? I think one thing though is like, and which is very hard to quantify, is like long-term impact of open source. I mean, like there's still a developer community who's like passionate about open source, and they will like spread good words about you and like and so on. Like, I don't know how to quantify that. So that's the reason, I guess. Like, yeah, I think.
Yeah, and let's be honest. Like, Rudderstack was such a story because you positioned as the open source CDP like right out of the gate. Yeah. Like it seems to me in your case, at the earliest days, there was no question that open source was, at least optically, like the thing that pushed the company into the forefront. And even if that sort of morphs over time, you got a ton of like launch value from that. Yeah. So that's also fascinating, right? And that can't be dismissed.
Exactly, 100%. I mean, like, we would not been here if not for that open source thing going up on Hacker News and so on. Right? So,
yeah, great. Well, these are fun issues to debate and to discuss and watch. As other companies are also tackling the same thing, and obviously we promote and believe deeply in open source here at Data Council, but I'm also an investor, and there's money to be made by companies who are doing the right things and bringing the right tools to market. And so this is often a question I get into with early founders, engineer founders. It's this discussion about how do you sort of weigh the trade-offs between initial open source offering versus a commercial offering. So obviously the jury's still out, but we'll continue to explore this with the community.
Definitely.
So I want to dig in a little bit more to the some of the uniquenesses of Rudderstack. Besides just its open source nature, what are some of the? I think most of the community understands basically what Rudderstack does, but why don't you give us just a quick run through of the core features of Rudderstack and how folks use it, and then we can go a little bit deeper from there.
Yeah, I think what we have. So I'll go back to that journey that I talked about, right? That every customer takes, right? You from the simplest stack where you want to collect your first party data from your app and send to all these different destinations, right? And that's where the pain point is typically, I don't want to integrate 5 different SDKs and each one has its own way of sending events and how do you do consistency and all this stuff, right? So we send it to Rudderstack and Rudderstack will guarantee event delivery to all of them and so on. I think that reduces your coding effort. It creates creates a consistent view across all these different data destinations, and it reduces your code. Generally you don't want to load too many JavaScript for performance reasons and so on. That's the core value prop of simplifying data integration at that layer, right? And so that's our core product, the event streaming product. But then as you go to the second and third stage of the stack, there you want to collect all this data into a data warehouse, and then you want to do some transformations, DVD transformations and so on. And then you want to take the output and send it to some destinations, right? Back, what do you call the reverse ETL and category today, right? So we enable that path too, right? We have the reverse ETL product, so we can get the data into the warehouse. We can take the data out of the warehouse and send to different destinations. At that point, you also want to bring some third-party data. You want to bring some data from Salesforce. Maybe you want to bring your ticketing data to create that complete customer profile. So we have those data pipes as well, right? Collect, bring third-party data, first-party data, send the data back from the warehouse. From our perspective, these are all different interesting ways in you want to move customer data, and that's what we have built, right? A complete solution to solve all customer data integration problems, right? So that's where the company is today. That's what we are monetizing, and I think that's a big revenue opportunity as segments and the other companies have shown. Right? But
and so building, you mentioned, so building on top of the data warehouse is a big thing for you guys, and do you feel this differentiates you from other players?
Yeah, 100%. I think that is the core. If you just tell how do you differentiate with this other CDPs? The number one differentiator is build everything around your data warehouse. We believe that everything, your customer data should be in your warehouse, and we have built the plumbing layers today, and we'll do a lot more. It's not just the plumbing, right? But yeah, today we have built the plumbing layers of data in and out of your warehouse and so on. And the other big focus is the persona itself, right? I mean, most CDPs are trying to sell to the marketing persona, and we are laser the data teams and so on.
Got it. So what are some of the interesting architectural decisions you made when building Rudderstack? Where do you feel you bucked a trend or learned from others? Can you give us some examples of some more interesting architectural aspects of the platform?
Yeah, I think, one thing I would say, which I don't think we did differently, but probably it was the natural thing to do, is to build for the cloud native world. It's a bed on Kubernetes, and this whole thing from day zero, even whether it's open source, whether it's a commercial offering, we kind of bet on Kubernetes. We deploy it, we distribute it as Helm charts and Docker images and so on. Right? So that's kind of one big thing we did. Other thing was again, because we wanted this to be distributed, not just run by us, but our customers. Well, actually, one other thing we did was around this notion of a control plane data plane separation, right? So, and again, this has become a standard these days, but a lot of other traditional, if you see companies which are built in the 2012, 13, 14 time frame, they not have this architecture, right? But you have this control plane which is hosted by us. The data plane is where all the data flows through, and the data plane can be run by us in a cloud offering. It could be run in customers VPC. It could be run by an open source user on a laptop and so on, right? So this control plane data plane separation gives you a lot of flexibility and control over data movement, right? So that's kind of one other architectural choice we did. Other thing we did was like build almost like a streaming engine on top, right? Typically you'd build like, if you had to design this, you'd like maybe use Kafka or one of these like streaming solutions, but like we build our own thing because we felt that this is a piece of software we want to have complete control over, and like and I have managed Kafka clusters in the past, and it's a pain, right? So maybe that's the other interesting thing we did with Rudderstack.
So you support streaming data. Well, I guess sort of by nature, the data streams through Rudderstack. Did you fully embrace the streaming paradigm in your own architecture, or is this like micro batches and other types of things?
No, it's fully streaming, right? I think that's where I guess like we differentiate with the like, I mean, we started with the event streaming, right? So that's built on streaming, and that even our ETL and reverse ETL solutions, they're also kind of built using the core engine, which is streaming. So we can do very interesting things with like the ETL side or the reverse ETL side because the core engine is streaming. You know, how do you transform and so on. But yeah, like streaming was extremely important because like some of these the first use case I was talking about, where you want to collect first party data and send it to like different destinations, right? And like we have customers who are triggering sensitive, well, not sensitive, like time dependent, like strict requirements around like timing. Like, I mean, password reset emails are being sent through Rudderstack events, right? So you cannot be delayed by more than like 20 seconds or like 5, whatever, and so on, because of the strict SLAs. If you look at a traditional ETL world or reverse ETL world, it's fine. I mean, if it data is very batch anyway, it's like a landing data like once in a couple of hours. So
got it. So very interesting that you guys run directly on top of the customer's data warehouse. You also use the term modern data stack in describing, how things are evolving in the space. I'm curious, what other tools do you play nicely with in the modern data ecosystem?
Yeah, I think like when you think about the modern data stack, like the key components are the data integration layer, which is like moving data in and out. And I think like, yeah, we are one of the vendors, but then there are like ETL vendors like Fivetrans of the world and so on, right? So, like, of course, they have a lot better coverage for use cases beyond customer data. We are just focused on customer data. So integration is one big piece. Then the other core piece is like the data warehouse itself. Like that is, everything is centered around that. So like Snowflake or Redshift or BigQuery, like that. And then you have like newer aids like Firebolt and Materialize. They're all like coming up with interesting angles to this data warehouse problem, right? So integration was getting data in and out. Warehouse is where you store. Then you do transformations on top of that data, right? So there are like two parts. One is like traditional SQL transformations, right? So you do it in SQL, you do your modeling in LookML if you're doing metrics kind of stuff, or DBT, like everybody does DBT transformations. Right? So the other big players in this. Then there is the visualization layer. You connect some kind of a BI tool to that, right? So they're like Tableaus and Lookers of the world. And the other path is like the ML path, right? Where you don't like, you're not doing simple transformations. You're like training ML models and things around that. So the problems there are around creating that feature store, and how do you store these features in the warehouse? How do you make them like keep them updated? How do you make it like online? And so we are going to do some interesting things around feature store and so on. But then there are other feature store companies who are just focused on the feature store, right? And then like and then the whole ML ecosystem, right? I mean, like around like SageMakers and like Google Vertex and so on. So like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about that layer, because you talked earlier about how sort of in your model of customer's journey through their own CDP types of applications, that ML training models, machine learning models based on the data is kind of the last step in the process for the most sophisticated customers. I'm just curious, like which tools you see as emerging at that layer of the stack that are being used by your customers now, if any, to integrate with Rudderstack and perform that ML or auto ML type activity on their own data.
Yeah, I think the biggest I'd say like one thing that I've been most impressed with is like BigQuery ML. So like the way they have made it really easy to like train ML model on top of your data warehouse and make them like production ready and so on. Like that I think we have a bunch of customers who are doing things on BigQuery ML. So that's like that I think is interesting. Then like we see bunch of these like auto ML companies, right, where you have the data in the warehouse, and then you like create this user table, which we call the user table, where you have like users and all the features about the user and so on. And then now you want to train a churn model, or you want to train something, and you don't like there are two approaches. Either you like go raw, you connect the Jupyter notebook to that, you load it, build a model, and either you're in the Databricks ecosystem, Databricks or SageMaker or whatever. Or if you don't have that team, then we see some people like will just connect something like H2O or data robot to the same data in a warehouse and like get a model up and running in minutes. So like customers, depending on the sophistication of the teams.
Yeah, got it.
Like I mean that H2O that ecosystem has probably because we primarily sell to the data and data science teams, so that's not super prevalent. But we do see like BigQuery ML is I think pretty interesting, and the traditional like the Databricks world and the SageMaker world.
Yep, got it. So back to Rudderstack itself. What's the roadmap for the near future, and what are you able to share with us that you're most excited about in terms of the Rudderstack product roadmap?
Yeah, I think like the way we can think about this is like enable our customers to take this whole journey, right? Like from simple to the most complex. And the next thing that I can talk about is like creating that user feature store, if you will, right? I mean, Rudderstack will collect all this raw data for you, like event data and the ETL data, like right? They're just dumped into all these raw tables. But then some data engineer has to go in and write like either DBT jobs or Spark jobs to like do identity stitching and then compute features. Right? So a feature could be like somebody, how many times somebody has logged in the last 7 days. Like, that's a very simple feature, but there could be complex features. Like has this person come to the checkout page and dropped off in the last 3 days or something like. So there are all these features people are interested in, like for your downstream processing. And then today they have to go and write like DBT projects or write them Spark things on the raw tables that Rudderstack is dumping to compute these features, right? So what we are going to what we are working on is like how do you like make that really easy, like so that somebody doesn't have to like write that code and run that pipeline, right? So that's kind of the last step. And then once you have this clean feature store or whatever you want to call it, and then like how do you activate, then there are multiple users of this. There is like ML users, there is like simple activation users, and then like you connect to some kind of a BI tool and do dashboarding. So all are use cases of that user table. So, but that's what we'll do, the first step of creating that table. And then hopefully we'll take the next step after that. And now that user table is there, can you like get a off-the-shelf model that you can just like point to that table and get something up and running? So yeah, but like that was further out.
I think it's interesting that you're calling this this feature the feature store versus the metric store, because it seems to me that if a company is sort of more tilted towards analytics, they call this a metric store, and if they're tilted more towards machine learning, they call this the feature store. Is this to say that, I mean, obviously you're taking cues from your customers and market research, but like how do you see this feature store, metric store overlap in your world?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think I mean, the world is forming an opinion on this also, right? So when I don't know how much can I like. I mean, I by no means I'm an expert in this, but I guess like one thing we're learning is like the requirements are slightly different for a metric and a feature, right? I mean, for example, like let's say you have a revenue metric, then you don't need like too much historic data, like what was the revenue on like last year this time and so on. When you're talking about features, you actually need to keep track of that, right? Historic versions of those features, because let's say you are training a churn model, like somebody churned last September, so then you want to know the feature. If you're training a model, then you need to know what are the feature values, like how many times he has logged in before he churned, right? So at last September and so on, right? So for these models, like you need to go to historic versions of the features and I guess that's one key difference between like feature metric store and so on.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is this functionality that you would build natively into Rudderstack, or is this an integration, or are you still deciding that?
Yeah, I think like metric store, we don't have a strong opinion that what exactly what is part of Rudderstack, what is not. But like at least the user feature store, like feature store is also a broad thing. I mean, like you can do ML for a lot of things, but like the way we think about this is like we are collecting the data. We know the data schema. We know what are the events you are collecting, and so on, right? So we know like how do like we can ask you how do you do identity stitching, and then creating this user table, like we actually want, we'll call it user table. We don't even want to call it user feature table. Like it's a user table. In the marketing world, you call it customer 360 or whatever, but like, I mean, that's also a marketing jargon. So like, that's the table we will instantiate, right? And that will have features around that user at different points in time. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And then now you can point multiple things to that and like
Cool.
get.
Awesome. Well, it's great to hear about your vision for the product and the space. And I have just another question to ask you before I let you go. Besides, how can people contact you if they have more questions, which I'll ask you in a minute. But my last question is, what surprised you most about your work in the data ecosystem so far?
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I was thinking about, yeah, I mean, like when I was doing my grad school, right, and in my PhD, like 2007-8, I'm like we are working on this high performance computing, as I was saying, right? And I thought like all problems in data have been solved, right? I mean, this is a dead field. I mean, like because people have been doing high performance computing for like 30 years before that, right? So I thought like there are no interesting data problems to be solved in 2007. So like I picked my PhD was actually not on like high performance data. Like we did more of like security and so on. But like I mean, how wrong was I? I mean, like if you look at like 15 years later, there's still interesting companies being formed. There's still like a lot of interesting problems in data. So yeah, it's kind of amazing like how this like
it's just exploding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's great. It's great to have you in Rudderstack part of it. We're looking forward to seeing you at Data Council Austin coming up, and excited about your participation there. So we hope to see you in the team there. And until then, I'm curious, how can people get a hold of you if they have other questions or want to learn more about Rudderstack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn or like email. My first name Soumyadeb, which is not the easiest to pronounce, but yeah, Soumyadeb.
We'll make sure we spell it right in the YouTube listing so people know how to find you.
Email and or LinkedIn is the best way to connect.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Soumyadeb, thanks for chatting with me. It's really been a pleasure, and excited, to see Rudderstack continue to do great things in the data ecosystem, and so wishing you the best for the company.
Thanks a lot, and thanks again for having me. It was really nice chatting with you. I had a lot of fun.
And thanks to our listeners for joining once again. We'll have more DC Thursdays coming up next month. And also, don't forget that Data Council Austin is coming. We've moved the dates because of COVID. It's now March 23rd and 24th, 2022. So we hope that you can join us and the rest of the data community in Austin. You can find more information on datacouncil.ai/Austin. So until then, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube so you can get notified of more awesome DC Thursdays that are upcoming. And we'll see you around the data community soon.